She threatened him with death, he smiled instead. The wreckage of the space station lay scattered in the cold expanse of space, once a thriving hub of intergalactic trade. Now it was nothing but twisted metal and floating debris. The emergency alarms had long stopped blaring, the lights had flickered out, and yet one figure moved through the darkness with purpose. Milan, a human explorer from Earth, floated carefully through the ruined corridors, his boots magnetic as he stepped cautiously over fallen beams and broken glass, his eyes sharp and focused scanned the surroundings. He had been sent on a rescue mission, but it didn't seem like there were any survivors left. The silence around him was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of his suit's life support system. He turned a corner, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The twisted remains of a hallway stretched out before him, leading to a larger room, maybe a cargo hold. But as he stepped forward, something made him pause. A strange faint sound echoed in the distance, a soft scraping, like metal against metal. Milan's pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. Carefully he edged closer to the source of the noise. He was a skilled scavenger, used to the dangers of abandoned space stations, but this felt different. It wasn't the typical sound of scavenger bots or lost equipment. It was the sound of something alive. Suddenly, there was a flash of movement in the shadows ahead. Milan froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at his side, even though he knew it wouldn't be much use in the cramped, debris-filled corridor. Then a figure stepped into the light, a tall, imposing woman, her skin glistening with a metallic sheen, stood before him. Her eyes were bright violet, filled with intensity like two burning stars in a stormy sky. She wore a form-fitting combat suit adorned with strange symbols. A warrior, Milan realized, probably one of the an alien race known for their ruthlessness in battle. The woman's gaze fixed on him, unwavering. Milan could feel her presence like a weight in the room. But he didn't flinch. The last thing he wanted was to show fear. His eyes locked with hers, and he couldn't help but notice something strange. There was a flicker of curiosity behind those piercing eyes, something he didn't expect from a NY warrior. The woman didn't speak at first, just studied him with an unreadable expression. Milan straightened, holding her gaze with a calmness that came from years of survival in dangerous situations. He had seen many alien races in his travels, but the were different. They were fierce, and their reputation for crushing enemies without hesitation was well known. Yet here on a destroyed space station, there was something off. Finally she spoke, her voice low and controlled, but with an edge that sent a chill down Milan's spine. "Why aren't you afraid of me, human?" she asked, as though it were the most obvious question in the universe. Milan blinked, but didn't hesitate. He smiled, though it was a small, knowing smile, not one of arrogance or fear. "Fear wastes time," he said simply, his voice steady, "and time is something I don't have right now." The woman's expression shifted ever so slightly, as if she was taken aback by his response. She expected him to tremble, to beg, to show signs of weakness, but there was none of that. He wasn't frightened of her, not in the slightest. Instead of attacking, she tilted her head, studying him further. "You are a strange human," she muttered. Milan noticed the way she said human, as though the word itself was something foreign, almost as if she had expected it to be accompanied by fear and desperation. But Milan wasn't like the others. He wasn't here to beg for his life or flee from danger. He was a survivor, and he knew how to read situations. This one was no different. The woman before him, though fierce and dangerous, wasn't an immediate threat, not unless he made her one look. Milan said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace, "I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to survive, same as you." The woman said nothing for a long moment. Her eyes flicked over him, scanning, assessing. Then, without warning, she turned and began walking down the hallway, her boots making almost no sound as she moved. Milan hesitated, but then followed, his curiosity getting the better of him. If She was willing to walk away without a fight, maybe, just maybe they could find a way to work together, but that didn't mean he was going to let his guard down, not just yet. Milan followed the alien woman through the dim corridors of the wrecked space station. Her movements were smooth, almost graceful, like a predator stalking its prey, but she didn't seem like she was going to attack him. She just walked ahead, her violet eyes scanning their surroundings, her every step measured and controlled. Milan kept his distance, watching her carefully. The longer he observed, the more intrigued he became. There was something unsettling about her calm, her complete lack of hesitation. She was one of the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, yet there was no sign of arrogance in her stride. She was different from the others he'd read about, more composed, more patient. They walked in silence for several minutes before she spoke, her voice as cold and precise as a blade. "Why aren't you afraid of me, human?" Milan blinked in surprise, but he didn't falter. He had expected the question. After all, she was everything he had been warned about: a ruthless, battle-hardened soldier. Most people would be terrified in her presence, yet here he was walking alongside her as if it were any day. He smiled slightly, his eyes never leaving her form. "Fear wastes time," he said simply, "and time is something I don't have." His voice was steady, calm, without a hint of fear or uncertainty. The Naira woman stopped in her tracks. Turning to face him, she studied him with an intensity that made the air feel thick, as if she were trying to read his very soul. Milan didn't look away. He wasn't afraid. He had been through enough danger to know when to act and when to wait. Now was the time to wait. "You don't fear death?" she asked, her voice almost too quiet, as if the idea itself confused her. Milan shook his head, his lips pulling into a wry smile. "I've seen death," he replied, his tone thoughtful. "It doesn't scare me, it's just part of life. What matters is how you live, not when you die." For a moment, the alien woman didn't respond. Her eyes flicked over him as if weighing his words. She seemed to be searching for some flaw, some crack in his calm demeanor, but Milan held steady, his expression neutral. He didn't know why, but something in her presence made him feel oddly comfortable, like she wasn't an enemy, not yet anyway. Finally, the woman let out a small, sharp exhale, almost like a laugh, though it didn't sound amused. "You humans are strange." Her words were soft, but the meaning was clear. She had expected him to cower in fear, to beg for mercy as others had, but here he was standing tall, completely unfazed. Milan shrugged his hands in his pockets as he looked around. "I guess that's the thing about humans, we're not like the others." He paused, then added, "You're not like the others either, though." Her eyebrows arched slightly. "What do you mean?" Milan gestured to the surrounding wreckage. "Most of your people would have killed me by now," he said, his voice light but his eyes sharp. "You haven't, not yet." The NY woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't kill without reason, human." She didn't sound defensive, rather it seemed like a statement of fact, as if she had made the decision herself that killing him would serve no purpose. Milan smiled, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "That's a good answer. I didn't expect it." For the first time since they'd met, the woman's expression softened just a fraction. "You are different from the others. Is that a compliment?" Milan asked, raising an eyebrow. She didn't answer at once. Instead, she turned and resumed walking, her step still purposeful. Milan fell into step beside her again. Intrigued by her change in attitude, he had expected hostility, a fight for survival, but so far he hadn't seen that. Instead, there was something else in her. Something he couldn't quite place. "Where are we going?" Milan asked, breaking the silence once more. The woman glanced over at him, her lips curling into the smallest of smiles. "To find the others." Her tone suggested that there was no point in explaining further, but Milan understood. She wasn't here to discuss her plans, she was here to survive, just like him. Milan nodded, accepting that for now she was his best chance at finding a way off the station. He wasn't entirely sure where she stood, enemy or ally, but He couldn't afford to waste time wondering, not when there was so much more at stake as they continued their journey through the wreckage. Milan couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was far from random. It was as if the universe had thrown them together for a reason. Whether they liked it or not, they were in this mess together, and for some strange reason Milan couldn't help but feel that this alien woman, this Nairi warrior, might just be his best chance at getting out alive. Milan and the Nairi warrior, whom he now thought of as Vela, continued their journey through the wreckage of the station. The air was thick with dust, and the silence between them grew, but there was no tension in it. It was as though they both understood something unspoken, that survival came first. The world around them had fallen apart, and now they had to move through it together, even if they didn't fully trust each other. Vela moved with practiced precision, her violet eyes scanning every corner, every darkened passage. Milan followed, doing the same. Though his senses were on alert for something more, he wasn't sure what had kept Vela from attacking him, but he was beginning to feel like he had more time than he'd originally thought. Still, he wasn't naive. He knew better than to let his guard down completely. As they passed through a massive open bay, Milan's attention was caught by a series of broken communication panels strewn across the floor. They seemed like old equipment, their screens flickering weakly. He stopped to inspect one of the panels, crouching down carefully, trying to see if any of it was still functioning. Violen noticed his pause and stepped over. She looked down at the panel, then back at Milan, saying nothing, her face unreadable. Milan fiddled with the panel for a moment, then sighed. It was dead. He was about to stand up when a loud metallic screech echoed from deeper within the station. Both of them froze. The sound came from somewhere far off in the wreckage, but it was enough to make Milan's heart race. He knew that sound it wasn't a part of the station. It wasn't one of the damaged systems. It was something else. Vela was already moving, her combat suit making little noise as she crouched beside him. Scavenger bots. Her voice was sharp, almost too calm. They are still active. Milan nodded quickly. Scavenger bots were programmed to clean up debris and salvage useful parts from wrecked ships or stations, but when activated by movement or heat, they became dangerous, ruthless machines, attacking anything in their path to clean. If they spotted them, both of them would be in serious trouble. Can we hide? Milan whispered, looking around for any cover. No. Vela didn't hesitate. We move. She grabbed his arm, pulling him up, and they began running fast but quiet. The screeching sound grew louder, closer, and soon Milan could hear the unmistakable hum of the scavenger bots. As they activated, they were hunting. The pair darted into a side corridor, one that Milan had merely overlooked in his search for equipment. Vela led the way, her steps sure and fast. Milan struggled to keep up. His heart pounded in his chest as he ran, keeping an eye over his shoulder. In the distance, he could see the flicker of the scavenger bots' red scanning lights. They reached a junction and ducked behind a stack of metal crates. Milan held his breath, hoping the bots wouldn't notice them. Vela stayed completely still beside him, her gaze locked on the darkness ahead, waiting for the right moment to act. Minutes passed. The sound of the bots echoed, but they didn't seem to be getting closer. Milan was starting to think they might have escaped when suddenly the lights in the corridor flickered and then went out entirely. The dark was complete, and for a moment it felt like they had been swallowed by the station. Vela's hand shot out, gripping Nalan's arm once again. He turned to face her, but she was already moving. Stay close. Her voice was a whisper, but there was no mistaking the command in it. They moved forward in total darkness, relying on Vela's senses more than Milan's. The sound of the scavenger bots was distant now, but Milan didn't trust it. They had to keep moving. Time seemed to stretch out endlessly as they navigated through the winding passages. Milan couldn't see anything, but Vale's presence was constant beside him, guiding him forward. He had no choice but to trust her. If he didn't, he'd be dead finally after what felt like hours. They'd reached a small, cramped room. Vela pulled open a hatch and shoved Milan inside before following herself. She sealed the hatch quickly, and they both sank to the ground, exhausted. The room was silent except for the sound of their breathing. Milan leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath, his mind racing with the adrenaline still coursing through him. It had been close, too close. Vela was already standing, scanning the small room. "We rest here." Her tone was matter-of-fact, though Milan could see a hint of fatigue in her eyes. Milan nodded, grateful for the chance to breathe. They had survived another close call, but he knew this was only the beginning. The wreckage of the station held more dangers, and they would need each other if they were going to make it out alive. He looked over at Vela. "Thank you," he said quietly. The silence in the small room was suffocating. Milan and Vela sat against the walls, both trying to catch their breath. The hum of the wrecked station was distant, now replaced by the quiet sound of their own breathing. It was strange to think that they were in a place where life had once thrived, now reduced to nothing more than a hollow shell of metal and dust. Milan wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. He had barely realized how much sweat had formed in the heat of their flight from the scavenger bots. His body ached, his muscles sore from running and hiding, but there was no time to rest, not yet. Vela had already risen to her feet, her sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in every corner, every shadow. She was calm, focused. And though she appeared unbothered, Milan could tell she wasn't going to relax until they were out of danger. She moved like a predator, always on alert. Finally she spoke. "We need to move." Milan stood up quickly, brushing off his suit. "Where to?" he asked. Vela didn't answer. Immediately she moved toward the door, her movements careful. The silence was unnerving, but Milan understood. She was listening, she was waiting for something. What he didn't know. A few seconds later she spoke again. "The scavenger bots have stopped searching, but that won't last long." She glanced back at him. "We need to leave this area. If they find us again, we won't get so lucky." Milan nodded, knowing she was right. They didn't have much time. He was used to danger, but this was different. He had never been hunted by machines that showed no mercy. Vale stepped out of the room, and Milan followed. They moved carefully through the darkened corridor, their steps soft on the cold metal floor. The wreckage of the station felt like a maze, and Milan found himself relying on Vela's instincts more than his own. She had been through places like this before, and it showed. They passed through several corridors, each one more damaged than they last. The walls were scared with burns, and the air smelled stale, like old metal. And the faint scent of burned electronics. Milan's stomach churned, but he kept his focus. He couldn't afford to be distracted now. They reached an intersection. Vela stopped abruptly, her body tense. Milan stayed close, his eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out toward them. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine, but he didn't show it. Then the sound came, a low hum, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder. The scavenger bots, they were close. Milan's heart raced. Vela's expression hardened. "They found us without warning." She grabbed Milan's arm and pulled him down a side passage. Milan followed, his pulse pounding in his ears. The sound of the bots grew louder, the hum like a swarm of angry insects. Closing in, he could feel the heat from their mechanical bodies, feel the pressure of their presence. As they searched the station, they moved swiftly, navigating through the twisted, broken halls of the space station. Milan didn't know how Vela could move so quietly, but he did his best to match her pace. His footsteps felt too loud, but he knew they had no choice but to keep going ahead of them. The corridor opened up into a massive chamber. The walls were lined with massive broken machinery, and the floor was scattered with debris. The space felt wide and open, perfect for an ambush. Vela glanced around and then turned to Milan. "We have to make a stand here." Her voice was quiet but firm. Milan's stomach dropped. He didn't want to fight, not like this, but there was no other option. He could hear the scavenger bots now, their metal legs scraping Against the floor, their scanners sweeping the area. Vela moved swiftly to a corner, taking cover behind a large pile of broken equipment. Milan followed. Crouching low beside her, the chamber was dark, the only light coming from the weak emergency lights that flickered on the walls. Stay quiet, let them get close. Vela's voice was barely a whisper. Milan nodded, trying to control his breathing. The scavenger bots were near. He could feel them closing in, the sound of their mechanical limbs scraping louder with each passing second. Vela's eyes never left the door. She was waiting for the right moment, calculating the exact time they needed to strike. Then the bots appeared. They moved in, scanning the space with their red lights, unaware of the two humans hidden in the shadows. Milan held his breath. It was now or never. Now, Vela shouted suddenly, and in a flash she was on her feet, charging toward the nearest bot. Milan followed suit, grabbing a piece of broken metal from the floor and using it like a club. The scavenger bots, now aware of their presence, turned to face them, their sensors aware, their mechanical arms raised to strike. The battle had begun. The scavenger bots advanced, their mechanical limbs scraping the floor with an eerie metal-on-metal sound. Milan gripped the broken piece of equipment tightly, his hands sweating despite the cold air. His heart raced as the bots' red sensors scanned the room, searching for targets. He could feel the weight of their gaze even as they moved past him. Vela moved first. She was a blur of motion, her movements precise and controlled. As she charged toward the nearest bot with one swift motion, she slammed her weapon into its side, knocking it off balance. The bot staggered but quickly corrected itself, its red eyes flashing bright in the dim light of the chamber. Milan didn't waste a moment. He rushed forward, using his makeshift weapon like a club. He swung it hard at one of the bots, aiming for its head. The bot reacted quickly, raising its mechanical arm to block the blow, but Milan's strike still made a loud clang as it hit the bot's. Sensors flashed in irritation, and it spun to face him, its body shifting like a predator ready to strike. For a moment, Milan and the bot locked eyes. The red sensors gleamed brightly, almost menacing, but Milan didn't back down. He knew this was a fight for survival, and he wasn't going to lose it. Vela was already attacking another bot, her combat training taking over as she dodged the bot's attempts to grab her with lightning speed. She twisted around, delivering a sharp blow to the bot's chest. It staggered back, sparks flying from the impact. Milan swung again at his opponent. This time, his weapon hit the bot's arm, knocking it off balance. The bot made a high-pitched warring noise as its arm jerked out of place, and it tried to adjust. Milan didn't give it the chance. He lunged forward, grabbing a piece of sharp metal from the floor and jabbing it toward the bot's exposed circuits. The bot staggered back again, its sensors flickering in confusion. Milan saw his opening and pushed harder. He thrust the metal deep into the bot's chest, the sound of electrical sparks filling the air as the bot systems went haywire. The bot collapsed to the ground with a loud crash. Milan quickly stepped back, eyes darting to see if any other bots were coming his way. Vela, meanwhile, had already disabled another bot. She stood over the damaged machine, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She didn't seem affected by the fight at all. She was a machine herself, always calculating, always ahead. But Milan could see the exhaustion creeping into her eyes. Even she couldn't keep up this pace forever. They had to finish this or they would be overwhelmed. One left, Vela said, her voice sharp as she turned toward the last remaining bot. It was still scanning the area, unaware that its companions had been taken down. Milan nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Let's finish this. They moved together, their movements in sync as they closed in on the last bot. Milan was closer, using the distraction Vela created to sneak up on the bot from behind. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the final strike. Vela's voice cut through the air. Now Milan lunged his sharp piece of metal aimed directly at the bot's back. He shoved it into the machine with all his strength, and the bot immediately jerked back, letting out an awful whine as its circuits fried sparks erupted from the wound, and the bot's movements grew erratic before it fell to the ground. Motionless, the room was silent except for the soft hum of the station's broken systems. Milan let out a breath, finally feeling the weight of the battle lift off his shoulders. The fight was over for now. Vela walked over to him, her eyes scanning the room one last time to ensure no more bots were coming. That was too close. Her voice was steady, but there was no hiding the exhaustion that lingered in her posture. She had fought hard, and so had he. Milan nodded, his body still tense from the battle. Yet it was, but we made it. Vela's gaze softened slightly, though she quickly masked it with her usual calm. Don't get too comfortable. We still need to move. Milan understood, even after a fight like that. There was no time to rest. They couldn't afford to stay in one place too long. The wreckage of the station was dangerous, and the scavenger bots weren't the only threat they faced. There could be other dangers lurking in the shadows. More bots or something worse. Where to now? Milan asked, his voice calm but his body still on edge. Vela looked around, her eyes calculating. We moved toward the command center. It's the safest place left. She didn't say more, but Milan could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't done, neither was he. They both turned and began walking through the dark corridor, once again their footsteps echoing in the stillness. Milan wasn't sure what awaited them at the command center, but he knew one thing: they weren't out of danger yet. The dark corridors of the station stretched before them, endless and twisted. Milan and Vale moved quietly, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The tension in the air was thick. The sound of their breathing seemed louder than ever after the fight with the scavenger bots. Every step felt like a risk, every shadow a possible enemy. Milan glanced at Vela. Her face was unredeemable, but he could see the signs of weariness in her eyes. She had fought with everything she had, and now it seemed like they were walking deeper into the heart of danger. He didn't know what kind of place this command center was, but he had a feeling it wouldn't be any safer than the last few chambers they had passed through. How much further? Milan asked, his voice low. Vela didn't answer right away. She was scanning their surroundings, her sharp eyes moving from side to side, never resting for long. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words. Vela's usual confidence was still there, but it seemed more guarded now. Even she couldn't ignore the danger that surrounded them. A few more minutes, she finally answered, her voice calm but firm. Milan nodded. He didn't need to hear more. He trusted her instincts, even if he didn't fully understand everything she was doing. She had led them this far. He hoped it would be enough. They continued on, moving down the narrow passage. The walls were covered in scorch marks and cracked panels, remnants of the chaos that had torn through the station. The air smelled stale and the temperature seemed to drop. As they descended further, suddenly a faint sound reached Milan's ears, a low hum, almost like machinery in motion. He tensed, his senses on high alert. The sound grew louder, and soon he could hear the whir of gears and the soft clanking of metal. Something was coming. Vela stopped dead in her tracks, her body tensing. Milan followed her lead, crouching low. As they both listened carefully, the noise was unmistakable now. More scavenger bots. We need to find cover, Vela whispered, her eyes darting to the sides, searching for a place to hide, but there was nowhere. The hallway was wide open, and the bots were too close to escape unnoticed. Milan's heart raced as he scanned the surroundings. His mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. He had no weapons left, just the broken metal shard he used earlier. He wasn't sure if that would be enough. This way, Vela grabbed his arm, pulling him into a narrow side passage. Milan followed her quickly, his steps silent on the cold metal floor. The bots were still coming, and they had to move fast. They ducked into a small alcove, barely big enough to hide both of them. Milan pressed his back against the wall, trying to control his breathing. Vela did the same, her eyes never leaving the passage they had just come through. The bots were close now. Milan could hear their wearing Motors and the soft clicking of their limbs, he could feel the vibrations in the floor, the sound growing louder with each passing second. Vela's hand rested on her side where a small device was attached to her belt. Milan knew what it was, a tracker. It was how she had known where to go next, how she had guided them through the wreckage of the station. He had seen her use it before, but he had never fully understood how it worked. Now he realized it might be their only hope. The bots were right outside the alcove now. Milan held his breath, waiting for the right moment. Vela's gaze shifted to the tracker, her fingers twitching slightly as if calculating the right time to act. Then, without warning, she stepped out of the alcove, her movements smooth and quick. Milan followed her, staying close behind. Vela sprinted down the passage, her speed surprising. Milan didn't think twice. He ran after her, trying to keep up, his legs burning from the effort. They rounded a corner just as the bots entered the passage they had been hiding in. Milan barely glanced over his shoulder, but he could hear the robots' motors shifting, their sensors scanning the air. They had missed them. Vela didn't stop. She was already ahead, pushing forward with an urgency that Milan couldn't ignore. The sound of their pursuers was still close, but Vela's pace never slowed. She was determined to reach the command center, and Milan could only follow. They passed through several more dark corridors, their steps echoing in the empty hallways. The station seemed endless, as though it were a labyrinth of metal and wires. Every turn seemed to lead to another danger, but Vale never hesitated. She knew where she was going. Milan trusted her, even if he didn't understand the whole picture. Finally, they reached a large set of doors. These were different from the others, heavier, reinforced. The command center, no doubt. The doors creaked open slowly, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Milan and Vela stepped through, their eyes scanning the room carefully. The command center was much larger than anything they had seen so far in the station. The walls were lined with strange panels, blinking lights, and control stations, some of them flickering in a dim, haunted light. There were large screens on the walls, all cracked and dead, showing nothing but static. It felt like stepping into the heart of something ancient. The air in the room was colder than the rest of the station, the silence almost unbearable. Milan could feel the weight of it pressing on him, as if the space itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Vela moved forward with purpose, not pausing to take in the surroundings. She was here for one reason: to reach the central control hub. Milan followed closely, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the dead silence or the strange emptiness that filled the space. There was something else, a sense of being watched. Vela didn't slow her pace. She was already at a terminal, tapping the screen with quick, practiced movements. Milan glanced around, but there was nothing to indicate who had once worked here or what had happened to them. The room was untouched, as though the people who had been here had simply vanished, leaving behind only the cold machinery. Do you think the scavenger bots are the only danger here? Milan asked quietly, his eyes still darting around the room. Vela didn't look up from the terminal. No, there's more to this station than you realize. Milan frowned. He wanted to ask her what she meant, but before he could, a strange hum filled the room, low at first but quickly growing louder. The lights overhead flickered, and the air seemed to pulse with energy. Milan's stomach dropped. He had heard that sound before. It was the same hum he'd heard earlier, before they had fought. The scavenger bots were not alone. Vela's voice was calm, but there was a cold edge to it. She looked up from the terminal, her eyes canning the shadows at the far end of the room. Nuland's heart began to race. He instinctively took a step back, his body tensing for a fight, but there was no immediate threat in sight, only darkness, deep and thick, creeping into the corners of the room. Then the ground beneath their feet shook, a low rumble followed by the sound of metal grinding against metal. Something large was moving, and it was getting closer. Vela's eyes narrowed. It's here. Milan didn't need any more explanation. He could feel the vibrations in the floor, the deep thrum of heavy machinery coming closer. The Door at the far side of the room slid open, and from the darkness beyond emerged a figure. At first it was just a shadow, a vague shape in the dim light, but as it stepped closer, Milan saw it. Clearly it was another bot, but unlike the scavengers they had fought before. This one was larger, its body bulkier, with heavy armor plating and a series of lights running down its spine. Its eyes glowed a bright blue, casting an eerie light over the room. Milan's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a bot, this was something else, something far more advanced. The bot stopped in the center of the room, its glowing eyes locking onto Milan and Vela. Its body shifted slightly, as if it were assessing them, weighing their chances. Milan could see the way its limbs were designed. This wasn't a machine made for basic tasks, this one was made for hunting. We need to go now. Vela's voice was sharp, but Milan could see the tension in her shoulders. She didn't move, though she was waiting. The bot moved forward slowly, its steps heavy and deliberate. It didn't rush, but it didn't need to. Milan could feel the power radiating from it like a storm ready to break. There was no escaping it. Now Vela suddenly raised her hand, signaling for Milan to stop. He hesitated, but obeyed, his heart pounding in his chest. Stay calm, Vela said quietly, her eyes never leaving the advancing bot. We have to outsmart it. Milan was confused. Outsmart it how? Before he could ask, Vela reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. Milan recognized it as a jammer, something used to disrupt the signals of nearby machines. She aimed it at the bot, pressing a button for a moment. Nothing happened. The bot continued to move toward them, its eyes glowing brighter, the sound of its mechanical limbs growing louder with each step. Milan's hand tightened around